Hi, church family. I get the pleasure of sharing just some encouragement for you this week. God gave me a few different ideas of what to share, but one of the things that stood out in my heart the most was to share about stepping out in faith. So, I don't know if some of you struggle with maybe doubt or fear about something that maybe God has called you to do, but you just haven't stepped out and started the process of doing it yet. So recently I've been reading in Joshua, and Joshua 3:8 says, "Tell the priests who carry the Ark of the Covenant, when you reach the edge of the Jordan's water, go and stand in the river." The New Living says, "Take a few steps into the river and stop there." And some versions say to stand still. So if you skip down to Joshua 3:13, it says, "The priests will carry the ark of the Lord of all the earth. As soon as their feet touch the water, the flow of water will be cut off upstream, and the river will stand up like a wall." So God had promised this land to the Israelites, remember? But now it was their time to go walk out their faith. They had to believe, and the priests had to take the steps into the river and stop and stand still for that river to part. So 2 Corinthians 5:7 says, "For we live by faith and not by sight." That's believing and not seeing, right? So the Amplified, I like how it says, "We're living our lives in a manner consistent with our confident belief in God's promises." When the people got to the river, according to some scholars and commentaries, it was at a flood stage. So this would be another test of the Israelites' faith, right? If in the Bible knowledge commentary, it reads, "Would they hesitate in fear or would they advance in their faith, believing that what God had promised would actually happen?" So in Joshua 3:15, I'm just skipping down here, it says, "Yeah, as soon as the priests who carried the ark reached the Jordan and their feet touched the water's edge, the water from upstream stopped flowing. The priests who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord stopped in the middle of the Jordan and stood on dry ground, while all Israel passed by until the whole nation had completed the crossing on dry ground." So there may be areas of your life where you know God has called you to do something, but fear or doubt has called you instead, like I said before, fear or doubt has kept you from stepping out in faith. Well, for me, this story resonated a lot because when right before COVID, well, no, it was right after COVID hit. I had one more training to do before they were shutting everything down at the school and at some of the trainings that we were doing for paraeducators. And I watched a video and God prompted in my heart, it's time for you to go back to school, because I thought about it for like 20 years to get my master's in social work. But he prompted me to get my master's in counseling, and that's kind of where I felt him leading. And in order to do that, I had to apply. I had to get some references together, do a bunch of, it was, a little bit of tedious work to get that process going. But once I made that decision, I just kept going. And every time I feel like, Lord, is this for me? He puts it on my heart, I've called you to do this. And it's totally by his strength that I've continued to do it. So, I could be thinking, oh, I'm 50. By the time I'm done here, I'm going to be 51, starting a new career. But when God calls you to do something and he puts it on your heart, you just have to step out and do it and be obedient to that. So some things may require baby steps, right? But you just have to have faith and take that first step forward. So one area that I have an example is I've been reading The Circle Maker, and I really suggest it. It's by Mark Batterson, and he is a pastor at a church in DC. And he says they were looking and they were wanting to buy this church, but he said, so a few years before they purchased the old crack house that they were wanting to buy, he went to an auction at his kid's school, and there was a 3-inch thick binder donated by Capitol Hill Restoration Society that contained the zoning codes, and it was $85. And he thought, well, we haven't even started the process, but God put it on his heart to do that. And he said it ended up coming in, total. It was completely handy when they were going through the process. So he says in his book, it's often our unwillingness to take a step of faith and get our feet wet that keeps us from experiencing miracle. Some people spend their entire lives on the eastern shore of the Jordan waiting for God to part the river, while God waits for them to get their feet wet. And then he goes on to say, we're waiting for God to make a move, while God is waiting for us to make a move. We say to God, why don't you part the river? But God says to us, why don't you get your feet wet? But if you make a move, you'll see God move. And then I also wanted to just share another example. I was listening to Joyce Meyer the other day, and she had a message called Step Out and Find Out. And she shared her testimony about how she started teaching Bible, how she became a Bible teacher. And she says that when God told her to teach, she said, but I don't know the Bible. I don't know how to teach. And God said, I do. And she said, teach them, but who's going to come? But she said her first step was to say yes to him. And then she said she started inviting people, and the rest is history. So, yeah, I just wanted to encourage everybody with that, just to say, if there's an area that you know that God has called you to do, whether it's, with a job situation or whatever. I mean, I know for me, there were times that I was miserable at a job, and God had said, you need to wait. You need to be, obedient. You need to submit to authority. And I had to listen and do that. But then there are times that he says, it's time to, go ahead and leave. And you either have to put in a resignation, or maybe you start applying at other places. But whatever it is that God's calling you to do, whether to write a book, whether to start a new career, I hope this just encourages you, and you just remember that we're walking by faith and not by sight. So have a blessed week. I think I'm trying to remember if so they were praying about it, and then he ended up getting a oh shoot,